Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Fun with Power Automate Improving talk. And I'll give everyone a few more minutes to join the call. If you have any issues currently not seeing the shared screen, please go ahead and just add it to the chat or ask a question in the chat, and the message will be relayed to me. But again, welcome. I'll give everyone one more minute. All right. Okay, I did not see any messages, so let's go ahead and get started. Again, welcome today to Fun with Power Automate. My name is Marcus Vandenbent. I do work for Improving. So I wanted to kind of start off today with a little bit of a quote here, just to talk about automation in general. And this is from Anna Brackett. She's actually an American philosopher known for being a translator, feminist, and educator. And this is kind of falls in line with what we're talking about today. So the more we reduce ourselves to machines in the lower things, the more force we shall set free to use in the higher. So kind of what that means is essentially the more we allow for automation to take over what we're doing manually, and especially repetitive tasks, the more we can get more efficient, the more freedom we have to focus on other things, possibly focusing on sales, focusing more on things outside of work, so to speak, where maybe things will take much longer doing it manually. So I just wanted to kind of start off with that quote. So just to kind of tell you a little bit about myself, again, my name is Marcus Vandenbent. I'm a senior consultant at Improving Atlanta. I'm actually super close to celebrating 5 years at Improving, so that's awesome. I've got my email address here if anyone would like to reach out. It's marcus.vandenbent@improving.com. My experience with Power Automate. So I pretty much when it started, I was really a big, massive fan just because I was very used to SharePoint Designer workflow, which is a truly terrible interface. The functionality was good. The interface was just poor. And it was somewhat challenging to connect different systems, so to speak, and it was really built more for SharePoint document management, approval, and such. Yes, could you get it to work with other things? Of course. So again, that's kind of where my experiences comes from. Of course, I've had several Power Automate projects already, as complex as creating a user based on an email that comes through, or an account that's created from a different system that's pushed then via API to a SharePoint list. But we'll get into details about that a little bit later too. So what I've done recently, and specifically the Power Platform, is I've done a lot of Power Apps training, which of course includes Power Automate. So there's a lot of different pieces there that kind of all, full circle come together, part of the Office 365 realm. Now let's make it a little bit more fun. What are some of my fun facts about myself? Love tennis. That's one of my favorite things. Do love to travel. It's kind of sad with the whole COVID situation. That's been very much a challenge. I'm originally from the Netherlands, so if I have a little bit of an accent, you may pick up on that. I've been married now for 18.5 years, love dogs, and non-flexible yoga enthusiast. Yes, that is me. I love yoga. I guess I could add kickboxing to that too. Non-flexible kickbox specialist, so to speak. I wouldn't say specialist, actually, beginner. I'm a lifelong learner, and then I've got CMS guru in there too. That's kind of my realm, so to speak. So again, if you want to reach out to me, marcus.vandenbent@improving.com, and thank you again for joining us. So for today, really, we want to focus in on Power Automate. Really going to kind of take a little bit of a high level, and then I'm going to dive in a little bit more into details and more complex flows that we can take a look at. I say flow, that's kind of the old terminology that we used to call it. Now, again, Power Automate. So we're going to cover what it is, who should be using it, why, when, and then kind of how. And that's where I'll actually go ahead and actually show you a demonstration of some of the flows that I have already built that are more practical. A lot of times with these types of presentations, we can keep it simple, but I would also like to give you a little bit more of a practical solution. Now, having said that, if you have any questions for myself, please feel free to go ahead and throw that in the chat. And then my partner in crime, Justin Barnett, who's actually on this call also, he can go ahead and relay those messages to me. So I will, if I see that, I'll go ahead and pause and I'll go ahead and take a look as to what the question is. So feel free to ask away. I love for the interaction, there to be tons of interaction. Granted, we may have a little bit of a bigger crowd, so I may take a minute to get to your question, but thank you again for joining us. And this is kind of our agenda for today for Power Automate. So let's go ahead, let's get into it. What is Power Automate? So Power Automate, again, like I stated earlier, it's formerly known as Flow, and it really allows you to automate routine day-to-day processes, right? So in other words, I'm trying to get a email that comes in from my manager and I need to go ahead and be alerted, maybe within Teams, maybe I want to go ahead and create a file based on an email that just came through. Again, automated processes, day-to-day processes that I want to automate. What does it do also? It integrates applications. So I can take something from, let's say, a SharePoint site, push it to Jira, push it to Salesforce, push it to SharePoint Online back. So I can kind of take certain elements, manipulate them, and push through it. So I kind of went over what the automation process is, but what types of flows are out there. So you really have three types currently. So you've got cloud flows, desktop flows, and then business flows. So when we talk about cloud flows, that's probably where we're going to focus in most of the intention today. But what is a cloud flow? A cloud flow is really something that sits within Power Automate that can either be triggered by an event. So let's say a new item arrives via email, a new item gets added to a list. It could also be a scheduled event. Let's say I want to run a stored procedure every night on a SQL database at 5 a.m. That would be a scheduled cloud flow. Then you also have a push button or an immediate flow. And that's kind of where you use your mobile interface where you have like a button and you click on it to actually start that flow. And why you may want to have that on your phone itself is just simply giving you that flexibility to start something like a I want to send an email based on something that I've received, or I want to be notified of something occurring, and possibly that's kind of the reasons why you would have that in place. Again, desktop flow, this is kind of where we're talking about robotics and such. And what I mean by robotics is you have your desktop, and let's say you have some type of very manual task that's repeatable that you're doing pretty much every day. A desktop flow allows you then to kind of create those steps, as long as they're repeatable, run them from your desktop, and then you'll be able to go ahead and save that as a flow, and then you could schedule it and so on and so on. So wonderful tool. And then we've got, last but not least, the business process flow. So what kind of differentiates these three? Cloud flow, obviously it's in the cloud. Desktop flow runs from your desktop. Granted, it is connected to the cloud also. And then your business process flow, think of that as more in line with your Dynamics or CRM. So this is an actual process, an actual business process. So something like when you have a lead that is converted to an opportunity, so to speak, all the steps that you go through for that particular process. And it's more or less, instead of you manipulating or changing data or going from system to system, it's more on the business side. Now I will go ahead and show you a little bit of a demonstration of that. The lead to opportunity is probably the simplest one to show. And of course, with the Dynamics new interface that they've recently come out with, it is a little bit easier and simpler to take a look at these flows. So all right, let's keep on moving. And again, if you do have a question, this will be the perfect opportunity to go ahead and throw that in the chat. If not, I will keep going. All right. So what is Power Automate? Kind of, we talked about, what it is. Well, yes, but who should use it? who here on this call should actually use Power Automate? And honestly, it's everyone. I would say start with developers to very complex tasks. Maybe you have something specific that's in a SQL database. As it gets added, you may want to get notified, or maybe even create another item within another SQL database, or maybe in Amazon and AWS. So all these different platforms where you want to integrate. Again, a developer would be a perfect fit for that. Now, having said that, that's more complex. A business analyst could do the same thing. Maybe there's an opportunity that comes in that's from Dynamics that's maybe, let's say, $10,000 or above. If I get that as a business analyst, I want to be warned that this is coming through the pipeline. I want to take a look at that, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, administrators, and I'll give you some more specific examples on that. Something like an IT administrator. So I want to create a site based on a certain form that's been filled out. Now, these are repeatable steps that I need to do on a day-to-day basis. So as an admin, I have maybe 30 steps. That's a lot of time to spend doing some of these things. So I can go ahead then and automate that. So an administrator would be a perfect example. Managers, I would say onboarding process. And then I've got some departments here, of course, finance. Again, certain thresholds that maybe certain numbers in your accounting system that have been met. Those could trigger alerts, trigger events to occur, trigger for certain other pieces. Sales, I think, is a great tool. Marketing, I've got a form that's being filled out online. Maybe I would like to get a notification if someone fills out that form. Maybe I want to be notified, not just in email, because sometimes email can become spam. Maybe I want to get a text within my Microsoft Teams interface, and then I can look through there, kind of how we're talking on the meeting right now. HR, again, the onboarding process, new client, et cetera, et cetera. But my point is, honestly, from simple to complex, work less, do more, like I stated in my slide here. It's really for everyone. Anyone who has an Office 365 license has the ability to use Power Automate. So let's dive a little bit more into that as to the reason why. But before I move on, I'll give everyone a few seconds here if they have any questions for me. I think that slide kind of was self-explanatory, but we will get more into details here. Okay. And again, I'm going to keep going. There is a little bit of delay, so you may have a question a little bit after the fact, but let me see here. So we're good to go. All right, so why should we use it, right? And honestly, it's the perfect one here. I've used this slide deck quite a few times, and this is actually even, I used this probably a couple of years ago where it was still known as Microsoft Flow versus Power Automate, and I keep harping on this. Automation, automation, automation. Processes that are repeatable, that you do on a day-to-day basis. Let's go ahead and automate those. Let's automate those tasks. And what that allows us to do is allows us to be more efficient. It gives us time back that we're wasting on remedial tasks, so to speak, right? This really handles that part. Again, versatility, right? So that's wonderful with Power Automate. You're not just limited to SharePoint or Office 365. There are tons and tons of connectors out there. You can query SQL. You can collect form results. You can automate even Azure DevOps tasks. So maybe you've got a bug that's come through and I need XYZ to occur. Maybe there's a corresponding Jira ticket that's created that I may want to be informed of, or maybe I want to create a certain task based off of another task that's created. Things of that sort. Again, that versatility is just amazing. Now, having said that, when you do connect to some of the more complex systems, so to speak, when you leave that Office 365 realm, there isn't an associated cost. But again, the premium connectors, like I stated in the last one, it's only $15 per user. And having said that, it's all about the connector. So specifically, when you're using Power Automate Cloud, the cloud flows, there's the account that you use to create your flow is really the only license account at that point that you're concerned with, because it's not as if the user who may trigger the flow is actually using or actually running the flow itself. It's the account that you used, that you've assigned access to then run that flow in the background. So that's again why it can be a very affordable solution. Again, I kind of skip turns here a little bit. Super easy to use. Love to implement. There's tons of templates to pick from. And again, complex solutions made easier. It just makes life easier. That's what I really enjoy. It gets me excited. Something that's super fun right now is that Microsoft has kind of switched gears from the common data service to the Dataverse. And if you get into the Dataverse and you start creating your own objects, then Power Automate just runs right in hand with that. You can now connect to these your different tables. You can create and triggers are based on certain columns that get changed, and it's just a fun interface. And I think it's a fantastic interface. And this is where I step back a little bit and I say, anyone remember SharePoint Designer Workflow, where when you looked at it, the screen was flashing and it was just, oh my goodness, it was just not a great tool to use. All right, so let's keep moving here. And let's actually go ahead and let's go from the why to the when. I'll give you guys a few minutes here if you have a question for me, and this would be the time to ask. I'll give everyone a few minutes here. And if not, then I will keep going. Just check my time. We're doing pretty good. All right. We're good to go. So when do we want to use it? Some of these I'm going to be a little bit repetitive, and the reason why, again, is I want to give the group that's on this call kind of a taste of what Power Automate can do for you. And again, I feel repetition is always the key to learning and kind of remembering it. For me, that's what works for me. So some of this is going to be like automation. Yes, we get it. But again, it's such a key element to this. So when to use it. Automated workflows, automation of data entry, data extraction, robotic process automation. That's what I meant to say before when I was discussing the desktop flows, right? That's exactly what that is. I've got certain sets of steps. I'm creating a spreadsheet with the same entries that I then go ahead and copy from my desktop folder to an Azure share. And then as it gets to the Azure share, maybe I do XYZ to it. Again, a robotic process that's repeatable that I can maybe control with some type of CSV file. Boom, I've got that in place. Automate your SQL tasks. Now, granted, there's a lot of automation already within SQL, but maybe some of these steps are not accessible to myself. So what I can do is if I have the right account with the correct access, I can set up my flow, or rather a SQL admin could set up these flows. Then as I create a new item or I trigger an event within my my flow itself. So let's say in SharePoint list, I say run SQL task at 4 a.m. Let's say that's my pseudo code that I've got in my list. Then as my flow is triggered, it's actually going to run that event. It's going to connect to SQL and do all the necessary steps. Again, when to use it, integration with other applications. That's just so massive. When I want to go from Office 365 SharePoint to Azure DevOps, I want to take my my dashboard that's available as an Excel spreadsheet and automatically push it to Power BI. Or maybe there's content that I have something else that I want to go ahead and push to Power BI. Again, this automation allows for that. Jira is a good example. So I've got a new email that comes in, and I don't have don't have some of the more complex Jira add-ins. So I'll go ahead and then connect using Power Automate to maybe create a Jira ticket based off of an email that has certain set of requirements that have been met. Of course, Salesforce is a good one too. Very similar. So in other words, I want to create, let's say I get an email from a new user. They're not in my system. It does a little bit of a check. It checks Salesforce to see if there's a lead there. If it's not there, maybe create a lead based on just that email that came in. Again, that integration. Some of this is relatively complex, of course, but taking it down and making it a little bit simpler, automated approval workflow. So in other words, I have a document that comes in. I need to go ahead and approve it. It goes through the process. So if we go ahead and let's talk a little bit about specific use cases. A lot of times when you talk in theory, it's sometimes a little bit more challenging to relate. So some specific use cases that I've mentioned earlier too, new employee onboarding. Perfect example. An employee signs a document. The document is then sent to HR. HR receives that email, then sends a request to IT to create the account, set up the laptop, provide access. All these tasks, all these various pieces are probably repeatable every single time. Perfect example for Power Automate to come into play. And maybe as the the employee has accepted the offer, an email gets sent out automatically with something like a DocuSign or something like that. There's various tools out there that then you'll go ahead and it gets sent to that employee, the new employee. They go ahead and approve and sign. As they sign, that document gets sent back to wherever the original repository is. For instance, let's say SharePoint. There's an integration there, and as it gets added, then I can go ahead and maybe print that or go ahead and start the next steps like I stated earlier. Sales agreement approval process, another great one. So let's say I have an agreement in place that between myself and the client, and it's a relatively massive one where I need to get, let's say, approvals from like 15 different executive members. Instead of me just sending it via email 100 times and no one really knows what's what anymore, now I go ahead and take advantage of the approval process. So I go ahead and maybe I run parallel. So maybe I have 15 approvals that go up at the same time. Maybe it's synchronous where I go one first, then the next, and the next, and the next. Maybe it's something where it's weighted. So there's all kinds of different abilities to start that approval process. New client onboarding, similar to, let's say, new employee onboarding. Why I've got that in here is, let's say I've got a new client that comes in, and as they're created, maybe they get their own SharePoint library, maybe they get their own SharePoint site. In addition, maybe they're connected to a team site. All of these manual steps, I can go ahead and kind of convert that to a Power Automate flow to get that process going. Like I mentioned before, the lead to opportunity process is also a good one. So that will go ahead and handle that part also. I'll go ahead and keep moving. But before I do that, does anyone have any use cases that they can think of that would apply in this case that you're like, oh, wow, I could probably use a flow specifically to do X, Y, Z. It can be both simple and both complex, but just out of curiosity, if you would like to throw something in the chat, that'd be great. I'll give you a few seconds here. All right, I don't see anything just yet. Again, if you have some examples that you come up later on, just throw ahead and throw them in the chat, and then Justin will relay that to me. But let's keep going. So when to use Power Automate, what I've got here is some examples of actual templates, and we'll take a look at those templates themselves. But something like, keep my schoolwork in sync with my Google Drive. So as I get a document, I'll go ahead and sync that to Google Drive. Another good one here is send an email for new tweets about a certain keyword. Let's say I've done this experiment a few times already. Let's say I do the hashtag hashtag work someplace awesome. Anytime someone tweets, I'll go ahead and send an email that I've gotten an email in my my inbox that basically says, hey, you've received a tweet from this XYZ person on date da 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 da, and so on and so on. So move data from Excel to SQL. That's one example. And yes, that's exactly what that's for sure a good example of what you could do. Granted, you would want to make sure that the format is consistent. The one risk with an Excel spreadsheet is that if it's a different spreadsheet, but in that case, since there is a connector from SharePoint to Excel, rather from Power Automate to Excel is what I meant to say. That would be probably the simplest way to go about it. So you have the same kind of spreadsheet, and let's say you do consistently row 1 through 100 on the very first tab. That would be perfect example. So every day I've got 100 items. I'll go ahead and click save. As I click save, that's my triggered event. That's my modify. And then boom, I go ahead and push that to SQL. Probably save would not be a good idea, actually, now I think about it, because SharePoint saves, or rather when you're working on a document within Office 365, it's automatically going to save. So I would say maybe a metadata column that says ready to move to SQL, or maybe you don't even have a triggered event, you just schedule it. ServiceNow tickets to create Azure DevOps ticket, perfect example. Yeah, I love that. So in other words, I've got a ServiceNow ticket. and we realize that it's really a dev task. So when a dev task comes in, boom, I need to push that to Azure DevOps. Correct. So another one I've got that came up here is when an event is triggered in the calendar, send an email. So I've got, and it could have specific requirements too, right? Maybe you're looking for a specific word or a specific action or a specific person that maybe have added something. Then I could be sent that a link to that particular calendar or share that particular calendar with a set of users. So very good examples. Thank you. Thank you. Again, that's kind of what this is all about also. So another one's here. Perfect. Create a row in another spreadsheet for a selected row. That's actually, granted, this is more SQL, Excel wise, but again, this is kind of what you guys already had mentioned earlier. Take data from SQL. Since you have that Excel connector, now I can connect to SQL. I can take my content and push it there. So it kind of allows you to do that. Something else that probably we don't spend enough time on is some of the tasks that you create within Office 365. This is a perfect tool for that. So maybe on the first of the month, I need to do check my logs. I need to go ahead and send an email to my customer. Maybe I need to check with my team on pending items. Boom, I can create a task, or I can create 3 tasks every specific day of the month. And I can even do daily tasks, honestly, too. It's all based on how you want to set it up. And again, when I mentioned who this is for, again, this is not just for developers or advanced users. It's also for your common day, business analysts, your clerks, so again, from advanced to maybe some of the folks that don't typically even get involved with any kind of development tasks. It almost makes them a little bit of a developer just by using some of these tools in front of you, because they are GUI based, they're relatively easy to use, and we'll talk about, actually we'll get to that a little bit where I'll go ahead and show that. So, all right, so let's keep moving. Thank you again for those examples. That was great. So I'm getting close to where I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of a show and tell. So let's talk about how to use Power Automate. Again, easy interface. We'll take a look at some of the templates. We'll take a look at that Visio diagram that we can actually use to create our flow, our Power Automate flow. We'll look at some of the connectors that are out there. So when I talk about connectors, that allows us to then integrate with all these different pieces, right? So just because I start a flow doesn't mean anything. I also need to go ahead. So maybe it's coming from Outlook. Maybe it's coming from SharePoint. Perhaps it's coming from Excel. I have to have a connector to these different applications so I can run my flow. And that's what those connectors are about. Granted, like I stated earlier, you have your kind of your freebie ones, but then you also have your premium connectors that are out there. Having said that about the premium connectors, I would recommend, if you do want to go ahead and use one of those premium connectors, that you go ahead and test it first. As you connect, it should give you, I believe it's about a 30-day trial or so to go ahead and try some of those premium connectors. Keep in mind, though, that the connector, the account that you use for that connector, does not have to be, of course, the same account that you use to create your Power Automate flow, but that specific account does need access to your application, your SQL server, your Dynamics environment, to your SharePoint list, to even Outlook. So in other words, if you're using someone else's account to retrieve an email from my inbox, that someone else's account will then need to have access to my inbox. So in other words, just keep that in mind as you're playing with some of these flows. And I would recommend that everyone kind of test and play with this and kind of just see it for themselves, right? One good thing that I love about Power Automate is the ability to kind of walk through from beginning to end how my flow ran. If it failed, if it's successful, or if it's even stuck, I can actually look and monitor the progress of my flow. Now, when I say get notified when something breaks, I think when flow came out, there was a little bit of a more of that notification that would automatically get out. In today's world, there are certain emails that will be sent out So this kind of disclaimer here that will warn you, okay, XYZ has not run, this flow has not run for 90 days. This flow has been disabled for XYZ. But let's say you have a specific error. If there is a specific error, it's not necessarily going to notify you real time unless you go into that flow, and in that step, you actually state, hey, if this step fails, then notify me via email with the information of to what has failed with a link to that flow. So just keep that in mind. I want to make sure I mention that because that's a little bit of older stuff. But all right, so let's go ahead and let's take an actual live look at our Power Automate world and kind of see how do we get there, right? How do you open it? How do I see it? And we're doing good on time, 1:32, so we're good there. I've got here my screenshots, so this is my notification in case my flow's not accessible, but it should be. So I'll go ahead and switch gears here a little bit. Let me go into my office.com realm, and I am in my demo environment. Would recommend, if you can do this in a demo environment, it's always preferred. Granted, not everyone has that type of access. But before I move forward, does anyone have any questions as to some of the slides we just went through? If not, I will keep pushing forward and we'll go kind of look at some of these different pieces. All right, I think, all right, perfect. So let's go take a look. So, all right, so I'm going to office.com. You can see my URL here. And as I log in with my credentials, that's really where I'm going to set up my Power Automate. So you log in with your license accounts. You then hit your app launcher. I fondly refer to this as my waffle, again, because it kind of reminds me of a waffle, and app launcher is kind of boring. So waffle is a little more exciting, right? So go ahead and click on waffle. And then you'll see your apps. If your Power Automate does not appear here, you may have to click on all apps. And again, it is something that should come with your license. If not, reach out to your administrator to get that taken care of. So I'll go ahead and you'll see Power Automate. Again, in the past, this would have been Microsoft Flow. You'll see the little arrow. I'll click on it. And this actually starts my Power Automate interface, my admin perspective, right? So I'm here on the startup page, which you can actually see some of the top picks, some of the popular ones. So you can see the templates are already there. See, these are some of the, I guess, what Microsoft refers to as the most used templates. So now, again, when we talk about Power Automate, yes, you can start from scratch, but you don't necessarily have to. You can pick a template and be done and just fill in the variables. That's really all you have to do. So again, we've got create a task planner, notify a channel when the status of a task in the planner updates. So that's a really nice one. So, but some of these are right there, here and there. So again, on the left-hand side, notice we've got the home button, we've got our action items, but I specifically want to click on my flows. So when I click on my flows, this is actually going to show the flows that I've already created. If you have none, of course, none would appear here, but why I wanted to show this here is now I've got my cloud flows, I have my desktop flows, my business process flows, and even shared with me. What's shared with me is if I want another user to use my flow, I'll share it with that user. As I share it with that user, now it will show up under shared with me. I believe my environment is, since I am in a demo, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the Contoso default, just to kind of show you a couple of flows that I've already built. There's a bunch of samples out there or exercises, and I'll go ahead. Yeah, at some point I'll post that within the chat. There's a lot of very good tools out there that kind of allow you, or not tools, step-by-step instructions on how to create some of these flows and kind of walk you through what to do. So I'll go ahead and take a look at one here, post list items to Twitter. We didn't really even mention Twitter. So what this actually does is it takes, as an item gets added to my SharePoint list, it actually then goes ahead and sends that to Twitter. So again, I've got my flow. So you can tell here my history, again, allows me to see exactly what's run. And these are the connections. Remember what I mentioned, the connections? So I've got approvals that I need to make sure I've got, the SharePoint side. So again, this is where I'm using my admin demo account because that does need access to SharePoint, right? To specifically the list that I'm working off of. And then Twitter, I'm just using my account just to post something. So if we look on if I go ahead and edit this now this actually shows my true interface. Now, like I mentioned before, it's kind of that Visio kind of environment, right? So this is my trigger when a new item is created. If I click on it, it'll expand. And you see here, I've got my address. So this is my actual SharePoint list. Sorry, my SharePoint site. This is the list. So in other words, when a new item is created for the Contasso tweets list, then let's go ahead and start the approval. So I'll send an email. So again, this would be perfect for marketing. Let's say I want to post a story to Twitter, but I need to go through the approval process. Instead of just sending an email to XYZ person, I can go ahead and just very simply follow these steps and then start an approval process where I'm going to go ahead and, based off of my list that I'll show you in a minute, I'll take the title. So it's the new tweet for whatever title I called it. Then I've assigned it to the person who needs to approve it. This is a little bit unrealistic environment since the creator is also the approver, but typically this would of course be a different person. Then I've got my details. So this is the body of my approval where I'm taking the tweet content on the tweet date, and then I've got this, and then I've got the link. So as this comes through, someone actually could take a look at this and then push through it. And then my condition. So as this gets approved, so in other words, if they approve it, yes. If no, then you get this. And if we look at the condition here, if I expand it, oops. Actually, this is the out of the box one, so it's either yes or no. You'll see I've got an update item. So in other words, yes, it's approved. So go ahead and then post the tweet. So I'll take the content that I have there, and just because it says tweet content doesn't necessarily mean anything. It's a variable that I can use. So if I click on here, it's actually dynamic. So whatever I connected to initially in my list will show up here. So notice I've got update item. So I can take any of these items really and push them into my tweet text there. So now if I go on my second one, so let's say I don't get it approved, then go ahead and I'll fill this out and I'll basically leave the comments there so I get notified, so to speak, that it's not been approved. Or rather, there's no email notification here, but it just states it as no, I've done the XYZ. So there we go. So if I go now look at oops, let me see if I can hide this here. Okay, here we go. If we look at our list, so I've got a tweet here. So I've just called it promotions, tweet content, So let me go ahead and just create a new one here. I'll call this lunch and learn. Test. The content is Power Automate Fun. And I will go ahead and I'll say the 13th. I'll pick a time. I know I'll pick like, let's say 14 here. I'll go ahead and hit save. So now I've created my event. So I've triggered the process to start. So if I go now to my flows, this may take a minute. Hopefully we can see it running. If not, that's okay. But I can look at some of the other ones. Now, keep in mind, since you are running off of a tenant and it's in the cloud, that some of these flows specifically that are triggered events may not necessarily run immediately. If it's a scheduled event, yes, then based on the time that you've scheduled it, it will run. But in this case, it's just looking for a new item. So if I go ahead and hit refresh one more time, I just want to see if I can actually take you through where it's at. So here we go. So it's actually running. So if we go through here, we can actually take a look, and this is what I love, right? It's going through the step-through process, and it's actually letting me look and truly troubleshoot to see where the flow is. So maybe a user who should have approved XYZ on dates, it's stuck somewhere in limbo. I can now troubleshoot to see exactly where it's stuck at, or maybe the person just hasn't approved. Now, granted, you could have some SLAs in place too, that if someone doesn't take an action, their manager can be notified, et cetera, et cetera. So here we go. So yes. So we know the item's been created. You can see the exact details in here, but it's waiting for the approval. So let me go back into my my office.com here, and I'll go into, I'll click my waffle, I'll click on Outlook, make sure I'm logged into the right account. Yes, I'm usually logged into about several different places, hence the reason why I'm saying that. I'll go look at my Outlook, and I should now have an incoming email for my new tweet. So here we go. So I've got a new tweet for L&L, and I've got it, and I can either approve or reject it. So let's go ahead and approve it. And I say, great tweet. Submit it. It'll gives them, you got to give it a minute, of course. So now let's go back to our flow that we were just looking at. And actually, holy cow, it already completed. So if I close this and close that, exactly. So it's already run. So as soon as I clicked approve, it said, all right, you've approved it. You've got your comments. And now as I follow through it, the condition is true because it is yes. I can see exactly what it just went ahead and did. So I went ahead and updated it. And then I also went ahead and posted a tweet. So I went ahead and posted this. So now I've actually posted a tweet because I went ahead and approved this. Now, what I mentioned earlier to you, in case this for whatever reason fails, one thing that we could do, and I'll go ahead and click edit here just to quickly show you. So let's say when a new item's created that fails. If I click on my my settings here, I can go ahead and retry it. And actually, it's not really, I'm actually doing the wrong one here, but let's say update item is a better example. Let's say my update fails. I'll go here and I'll take a look. And then I can go ahead and retry it, of course, and I can go ahead and have an email sent to me in case it's not successful. It's failure. So if I go in here, yeah, there we go. But all right, so again, take you through that process from beginning to end. So now that we've kind of taken a look at an actual flow, let's take one step back. And I went ahead and taken a look at a flow, but let's say I want to create specifically a scheduled process, right? Or rather a scheduled flow, a cloud flow. So again, I've clicked on my flows. I can click on, see how I've got the plus in new flow? If I click on here, I can go ahead and automate it. Instant, again, that's be a button. So some kind of application where you hit the button, or mobile, of course. I'll do scheduled cloud flow. And if I click on that, I give it a name, and then I can give it the starting time versus what we just looked at, which was a triggered event, was based off of an action that was taken within SharePoint itself. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask away. And I got to push on a little bit faster now. The one other thing I wanted to show you, we've talked a little bit about the cloud flows, and you can tell here you've got scheduled, you've got automated, you've got instant. The one here for an instant one that's a good one to see is I've got here that's really a Power App. So my Power App is connected to my flow that then as I click OK or save on my Power App, the flow is then triggered. So if we look at the edits and I actually look at the Power App itself, you can see that that's already been configured. That should be good. I've got some settings here I can take a look at. But then as it gets done, I get a new account says this has been created. So in other words, I've got my Power App that I've set to then create an account. As it creates an account and hit OK, I send an email notification. So I wanted to show that. The other piece I wanted to show you, we've now taken a look at our scheduled. We've taken a look at the instant one. We've taken a look at the flow or triggered or automated, right? But what about the business process flows? So now the desktop flows, I don't have too much to show you on this end besides just explaining as to what it does. But I did want to show you just for the sake of time. But I've got some defaults here. Now I want to go ahead and change my environment. Notice I've got my default. I want to change to my Dynamics environment. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the CRM. And now, again, it will reload. I'll click on business process flows. And now these particular flows, if you're familiar with Dynamics, these should be very familiar to you. So remember I mentioned the lead to opportunity sales process. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And the interface will be a little bit different, but at the same time, as we look at this, it'll be very familiar to you exactly what goes on and kind of be able to distinguish between what's what. So let's take a look here. If it does load at some point. And this is honestly just to give you a little bit of a taste, just to show you the business process flows and to show you the how they're different. And this is taking a minute to load. I probably should have had this open before earlier, just to kind of show you what I've done with Teams. So notice I've got these strange names here. So this is not the greatest example, but what this is a good example of is I had a Power App that as my account got created, it actually created a SharePoint site with a team site. And that's why you have these strange names, because if you automate something, you have to make certain that you don't recreate the same thing. And in this case, I actually used, I think but it's kind of crazy. As you can tell, I've got a really long name here, but that does make it distinct, so to speak. So just be careful if you do have some automation that you probably want metadata items that instead of just using the date, maybe this could be, instead of saying new customer check-in, maybe it's just like any kind of customer, shoes.inc on this check-in or something like that. That would be a much better sample. All right, this is still loading. I'll let this load and I'll get back to that. But let's go ahead and let's take one step back and let's look back at our slideshow, because what I do want to show you is we've talked about desktop, we've talked about scheduled, we talked about cloud flows, we talked about the business process flows. Granted, I do want to show you that, but what about the mobile side? So what's really neat about the mobile one is that you've got an application that you can download from your store. It's both Android, iOS, on the Windows phone, and then you can actually take your flow that you've just run. It could be super complex, super simple, and then see the activity. You can even manage it. But what's even cooler is I could even start some of these if they're push buttons. And I'll show you that on the next screen. And of course, I could even create. Now, you are limited to what you can create, but there are certain flows that you can even create on the mobile device. So if I click on the next slide, you'll see your two buttons. So I can even send an email that essentially to join a meeting, or I get a push notification when you receive an email from your boss. These are perfect examples of some of these flows that you'll be visible. And these are some of the screens. Notice right now it's on buttons. This one is activity. So this is the activity that's run. And then here are kind of my flow. So these are, I can enable it, I can disable it, I can even do some editing, I can look at it, or I can even delete. And again, why I wanted to show you that is just to give you that flexibility, to tell that story of how Power Automate can be super flexible. So in other words, I'm on a trip. I've got some massive process that needs to run, but I want to make certain that it runs okay. I can now, as long as I have internet connectivity, I can go on my mobile app and take a look at my flow to see if it ran. Possibly, maybe it's not sending an email. Maybe it's going to Teams, XYZ. So again, this gives me that flexibility to take a look at it. So really, really cool stuff. All right, so the next thing I wanted to show you is kind of a more complex flow. But before I even do that, does anyone have any more questions for me? I think we're still pretty good. And I'll keep going. Perfect. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and take a look. And I think I won't have time to show you both, but let's take a look at the document management one. So I'm going to give you a scenario here. We've got a library where we upload documents with certain metadata. Based off of that metadata, XYZ needs to occur. So maybe it needs to go to a pending folder where if it's sent to that pending folder, I can do XYZ. Or maybe the document's already completed and finalized. I wanted to push it to a final location. I can take that document with associated metadata, and all metadata is just, let's say it's a sales agreement that is for client shoes.inc. With it's based off of, let's say, higher than $10,000. Now I've got my metadata, and based on those elements, I'll go ahead and then push that document and maybe even have it approved. But let's go ahead and take a look at this flow itself. So let's go take a look. I've got this. I should have this open already. And I do. So I do want to warn you, when you do work with some of these flows, go ahead and make sure you make them very descriptive. My name here, in my case, this is pretty specific, but in your case, you may want to go ahead and make it as descriptive as possible, because as you create these, that's one caveat that you may run into. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at this. So again, document comes in to my library. And hopefully, yes, it loaded pretty quickly. So in this case, I'm even doing it when it's created or modified. So that's my trigger. Again, it's based off of this folder called client files in a library called auto file. And then I'll go ahead and let's start that process. So if my metadata item says yes, then go ahead and start my flow. So I've got here, not only is it triggered based if it's created or modified, I also am looking for, is it ready to go? Because sometimes just as you make a change, you don't necessarily want the process to start. So if it's yes, if it's no, then go ahead and stop. If it is yes, it grabs all the content. And again, these are dynamic values, right? So if this equals this, and that, then go ahead and update. And so notice I've got change of address, very specific requirements. But based off of these requirements, if it meets this, then let's go ahead and update my metadata. So it's going to go ahead and update my metadata. And then based off of that, it's actually going to go ahead and then take that to either my pending folder or library, my complete library, or my pending Schwab rather. So I've got various different options here. And then of course, if we go back to the tree, let's say that's not the case. Let's say that it is a financial document type part 2, and we can look at a condition. Maybe it's just full power of attorney. If that's the case, then do XYZ. If not, and again, notice how I keep going. One thing you want to be aware of as you go through this is you got to be careful if you go too far down the path, right? This can get quickly out of hand, but you're good to go. I think we're probably running short a little bit of time here. So let me go ahead and get back to just see if I can see the business process flow once more. If not, we'll keep moving. And it doesn't want to load for me today. I'm so sorry. All right, let's see if any of these other ones will create it. I'm having an issue today with my flow. But essentially what the business process flow, it just allows you, here we go, perfect. So I've got my process, I just had to click it. So in other words, remember what we looked at our flows before, we've got the lead, we've got the opportunity, we've got the propose and the close itself. If you click on the details, is this existing contact? Purchase the frame time, estimate. These are all the steps that are part of my process. Then the next process, and I just wanted to kind of give you a taste to see exactly what happens. So as these things are met, as they are processed, then you go through the next part of the flow itself. And again, think dynamics when you're looking from beginning to end, that kind of that path, that's what this is. So again, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a taste. Now we are running a little bit short on time. So let me go back to my flow. And I did want to go ahead. So we kind of looked at some of these different bits and pieces, both very simple to complex. The tweet was relatively a simple one. It could just be an email notification. And then if I go, if I wanted to create a new account based on XYZ, I could do that too. I have a very complex document management system. I can also do that. If I want to interface with different pieces, I can do that too. So I did want to leave you with just one quote, and this is a very important quote. I love this quote by Bill Gates, and basically says, automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the inefficiency. So it's kind of like, huh? Well, essentially, if it's an inefficient operation, if you automate it, boom, you're going to see it has full visibility. So what the point behind that is plan. Test, plan, make certain it's all good to go, and you're going to be wonderful. Again, thank you again for your time. So this is really a good time here to ask some questions. Again, you can reach me at marcus.vandenbent@approving.com. You've also have iahelps@improving.com. Again, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions, we've got about 3 minutes, so please ask away. If not, thank you for joining, and then we'll give everyone a few minutes to ask away. Maybe a specific example, maybe a good one where you've run into this before, where something has not worked. I can give you a quick tip. Or if you have a question specifically as to what is what, maybe the business process flow compared to the regular cloud flow, what are some of the differences there? But please feel free to ask. And thank you again for your time. It was wonderful. I really appreciated it. And thank you. So again, thank you, Justin. Thank you to the rest of the Improving team who put this together. And thank you for joining. But I'll give you a few more minutes. If not, we can say goodbye. And then, all right. So let's see if anyone, all right. I don't believe we have anything else. Again, wanted to point out to you, for those who are not necessarily working for improving ourselves, we do provide support training. Just to provide you that last slide here, we do agile training, which is really cool. We definitely are masters in the data engineering. So any of this, light bulbs go off, please reach out. We can definitely assist with that. We're here to solve your problems. Automation is sometimes the key to solve those issues. All right, everyone. I don't see any more questions. We're right at 2 p.m. So thank you. Have a fantastic weekend. And remember to play with this. Test it, test it, test it. Just have a good time. Thanks, everyone. Cheers, and see you the next time.